On the 11th of February, 1990, a man walked out of Victor Verster Prison in South Africa after 27 years behind bars. He was 71 years old. His hair had gone white. His stride was slower than it had been when they locked him away. The world had changed beyond recognition in the decades he had spent in a cell. He raised his right fist into the air. The crowd erupted. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela had spent more than a quarter century in prison for daring to believe that his country's black majority deserved the same rights as its white minority. He had been offered his freedom multiple times on the condition that he renounce his beliefs. Every time, he refused. He walked out of that prison not broken, not bitter, not consumed by rage, but with a clarity of purpose that stunned the world. Within 4 years, he would be the president of South Africa. Within a decade, he would be the most respected human being on the planet. This is the story of a man who turned 27 years of imprisonment into the foundation of a nation's freedom. Welcome to Visionary Chronicles. To understand what Nelson Mandela endured and what he chose to do with that endurance, you have to understand the world he was born into. A world where the color of your skin determined where you could live, where you could work, who you could marry, where you could walk, and whether your life had value in the eyes of your country's law. Apartheid, the Afrikaans word for separateness, was not simply a policy. It was a comprehensive, bureaucratically enforced system of racial domination that classified every person in South Africa from birth and built an entire legal architecture around maintaining white supremacy. Mandela was born into that world. He was educated in it. He became a lawyer in it. He fought it, was imprisoned for fighting it, and then, impossibly, forgave it. What you are about to hear is not simply a political story. It is a story about the nature of moral courage, about what it costs to hold to a principle when the cost is your freedom, about what it means to choose reconciliation when the world expects revenge. Stay with us, because the lessons in this life are among the most profound any human being has ever demonstrated. Rolihlahla Mandela was born on the 18th of July, 1918, in the small village of Mvezo in the Transkei region of South Africa, in what is now the Eastern Cape. He was the son of Nkosi Mfakanyiswa Gadla Mandela, a chief counselor of the Thembu people, and his third wife, Nosekeni Fanny. Rolihlahla, the name means troublemaker in Xhosa, a fact his family would later find fitting, grew up in a world that was traditional, structured, and proud. His father was a man of standing within the Thembu royal house, and the young boy grew up listening to the elders tell stories of chiefs and warriors and the days before the British came. When he was 7, his father arranged for him to attend a local Methodist school. It was there that his teacher, following the custom of giving African students English names, called him Nelson. The name stuck. He would carry both names for the rest of his life, the given name his family chose, and the colonial name his country imposed. His father died when Mandela was 9 years old. The regent of the Thembu people, Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, became his guardian. Jongintaba sent him to the Clarkberry Boarding Institute and later to Healdtown, a prestigious Methodist school, one of the finest educational institutions for black South Africans in the country at the time. Mandela arrived at the University of Fort Hare, the only institution of higher learning for black South Africans, in 1939. He was 21 years old, confident, athletic, and intellectually alive. He was elected to the Students' Representative Council. Then, when he sided with students protesting conditions at the university, he was expelled. Rather than face the arranged marriage Ntaba had planned for him, he did something that would define the rest of his life. He ran. He and a cousin fled to Johannesburg, the great, chaotic, electric city of gold, where everything was possible and nothing was safe. In Johannesburg, Mandela encountered the full brutality of apartheid for the first time at scale. He found work as a clerk at a white law firm and studied law by correspondence through the University of South Africa. He met Oliver Tambo, who would become his closest friend and political partner. And he encountered the African National Congress, the political organization that had been fighting for black South African rights since 1912. He joined. He was 24 years old. It would consume the next 7 decades of his life. Through the 1940s, Mandela became increasingly radicalized, not toward violence, but toward urgency. He and Oliver Tambo opened the first black law firm in South Africa, providing legal representation to people who had none. He rose through the ANC, co-founding its youth league and pushing the organization toward a more confrontational, mass action approach. When the National Party swept to power in 1948 and began formally codifying apartheid into law, the Population Registration Act, the Group Areas Act, the Separate Amenities Act, Mandela helped organize the Defiance Campaign of 1952, a nationwide campaign of civil disobedience inspired by Gandhi's philosophy, in which black South Africans deliberately violated unjust laws and invited arrest. Thousands were arrested, Mandela among them. The government responded by banning him, restricting his movements, his speech, and his political activity repeatedly over the following decade. He spent years under banning orders that were periodically renewed and extended. In 1960, everything changed. On the 21st of March, a peaceful protest in the township of Sharpeville turned into a massacre when South African police opened fire on the crowd, killing 69 people and wounding 180 more. Most were shot in the back. The Sharpeville massacre shattered the possibility of purely peaceful protest in the minds of many within the ANC. The government banned the ANC entirely. Mandela and others went underground. And Mandela, who had spent more than a decade committed to nonviolence, made the most agonizing decision of his political life. If the state was willing to massacre peaceful protesters, then peaceful protest alone could no longer be the only weapon. He helped found Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC, whose initial campaigns targeted infrastructure rather than people. He traveled secretly to other African countries seeking support. He trained abroad. He became, in the eyes of the South African government, not a dissident, but a terrorist. In 1962, he was arrested. In 1964, at the Rivonia trial, one of the most famous political trials of the 20th century, he gave a statement that became one of the most quoted speeches in human history. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for. But my Lord, if need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was 45 years old. For the next 18 years, he was held on Robben Island, a bleak, windswept outcropping in Table Bay, off the coast of Cape Town. For much of that time, he lived in a cell 8 feet by 7 feet. He broke rocks in a limestone quarry under a summer sun so brutal that the reflection permanently damaged his eyes. He was allowed 1 visitor every 6 months. 1 letter every 6 months, censored. His mother died while he was imprisoned. He was not allowed to attend her funeral. His eldest son died in a car accident. He was not allowed to attend the funeral. He was not broken. He organized. He educated. He counseled fellow prisoners. He studied law. He gardened. He maintained discipline and dignity with a conscientiousness that became legendary among his fellow inmates. He treated his jailers with courtesy. Some of them, years later, would describe him as the most remarkable human being they had ever met. He was moved to Pollsmoor Prison in 1982, and later to Victor Verster Prison, where conditions were more comfortable, but the isolation was complete. And all the while, the world outside was changing. International pressure on South Africa's apartheid government was intensifying. Economic sanctions were biting. The ANC, led in exile by Oliver Tambo, kept the struggle alive. Young South Africans in the townships were rising in revolt. The system that had seemed immovable was beginning slowly to crack. In 1985, President P.W. Botha offered Mandela his freedom on the condition that he renounce violence. Mandela refused. His daughter Zinzi read his response aloud to a crowd of thousands. "I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated." He remained in prison for 5 more years. On the 11th of February, 1990, the new South African president F.W. de Klerk, under irresistible internal and international pressure, ordered Mandela's release. The ANC was unbanned. The long negotiation toward a new South Africa began. What followed was 4 years of some of the most delicate and dangerous political negotiation in modern history. South Africa was on the edge. Armed groups on the far right threatened civil war if the white minority lost power. Violence between ANC supporters and other black political factions was claiming hundreds of lives. The country was fracturing along lines that could have produced catastrophe. Mandela walked into that chaos and chose the hardest path available to him: reconciliation. He did not call for retribution against those who had imprisoned him or enforced apartheid. He did not organize revenge. He sat down at a table with the architects of the system that had stolen 27 years of his life and negotiated the end of it, with patience, with strategic intelligence, and with a moral authority that no one in the room could match. On April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first fully democratic election. The lines at polling stations stretched for miles. Black South Africans who had never been allowed to vote in their country's elections, many of them elderly, many of them weeping, stood for hours in those lines. The ANC won. Nelson Mandela became the first democratically elected president of South Africa. At his inauguration on the 10th of May, 1994, 3 of his former prison guards were seated in the audience as honored guests. He had invited them. He served 1 term as president, 5 years. He insisted on that. He believed deeply that democratic leadership required restraint and succession. He could have run again. He almost certainly would have won. He stepped down. He spent his remaining years as the world's most respected elder statesman. He received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, jointly with F.W. de Klerk. He was awarded the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom. He received honorary doctorates from more than 50 universities. He became a symbol not of one country's liberation, but of what the human spirit can endure and transcend. Nelson Mandela died on the 5th of December, 2013. He was 95 years old. World leaders lined up to mourn him. Ordinary people gathered in the streets of cities on every continent. The flags of nations flew at half-staff. And in South Africa, the country he had helped to birth from the wreckage of one of history's most brutal systems of oppression, his people said goodbye to the man they had called Madiba, father. So what does the life of Nelson Mandela teach us? What can one person reading or listening to this story carry into their own life? The first lesson is about the difference between anger and purpose. Mandela had every right to be consumed by rage. He had been imprisoned for 27 years. He had missed his children growing up. He had missed his mother's death. He had been stripped of decades of his life by a system designed to break him. And yet, when he emerged from prison, he was not primarily angry. He was purposeful. He understood, at a level most of us never reach, that anger and purpose are not the same thing, and that the latter is far more powerful. Anger burns out, purpose builds. The second lesson is about the long game. Mandela was willing to endure what almost no person in history has been asked to endure, because he was playing a game measured in decades, not months. His certainty that apartheid would eventually fall was not wishful thinking. It was strategic patience. He trusted the arc of history, and he was right. But trusting that arc required him to remain committed when every short-term signal said the cause was hopeless. The third lesson is about reconciliation as strength, not weakness. The moment Mandela chose not to pursue retribution, the moment he sat across from his jailers and treated them as partners in a new future, many people called it naive. They were wrong. It was the most strategically brilliant choice he could have made. A South Africa consumed by revenge would have burned. A South Africa committed to building, even imperfectly, had a chance. He chose the chance. And South Africa, for all its remaining struggles, did not fall into civil war. The fourth lesson is about what it means to lead with moral authority rather than positional authority. Mandela had no army. He had no television platform. For years, he had no freedom. What he had was an absolute consistency between his stated values and his actions, between what he said he believed and what he was willing to suffer for. That consistency is rare, and it is, in the long run, the most powerful form of leadership that exists. Not all of us will face what Mandela faced. Most of us will never be asked to sacrifice a decade, let alone 3. But all of us will face moments when we must choose between what is easy and what is right, between anger and purpose, between short-term comfort and long-term impact, between the story the world has written about us and the story we choose to write about ourselves. In those moments, the life of Nelson Mandela is a compass. Point toward what you believe in. Walk toward it. Keep walking, even when the road is a prison cell. The world eventually will follow. This has been Visionary Chronicles.